In the last episode of Milgeekachu, I showed off a couple of new acquisitions, including an N-gauge diesel model body kit from Budget Railway Modelers UK. My goal was to replace the body of my KATO pocket line electric Loco with a diesel body instead. The BMR kit seemed to be the easy way to do this, and at the same time give me a template to examine so I might attempt to design my own Loco body in the future. As it turned out, once I had the BMR body, it didn't seem like too much of a challenge for me to design a simple copy myself using Tinkercad just for the experience of doing so. Initially, my plan was to design a diesel body which differed from the BMR central cab design, but while undertaking the work in Tinkercad and making a dummy chassis shape to ensure the body would fit onto it, I noticed that BMR had designed the shape of their body for a particular reason. The KATO 11-109 power chassis that I'd bought to complete my model is of such a shape as to make a central cab Loco design almost unavoidable because of the motor's central placement, and therefore I reluctantly decided to replicate this format of cab and simply make this a practice exercise. In the future I'd probably buy another KATO chassis that does facilitate a rear position cab as I'd originally intended. The resultant 3D print didn't actually turn out to be too bad, although I did have to simplify the design a little as I was pushing the limits of my Flashforge Adventurer 3 as far as the quality of the resolution I could expect at this small scale. In the end we shall have to see whether my model or the BMR original will look the best once painted. One point I noticed about the BMR body was its quality of fit onto the KATO 11-109 power chassis. Once clipped onto the body, it had a tendency to sit somewhat off kilter and would require a bit of work to get it to sit straight. But meanwhile, my print version clipped on in perfect alignment straight off the bat, so a point to me I guess. Well, I was so pleased with the smoothness of the main body of my Loco print and the alignment of its fit to the chassis unit that I decided to have a crack at completing my body design first. I'll complete the BMR version of the kit after this, then we can compare the two. So I began with the cab's windowsills, which I omitted from my 3D design. I used very thin sub-millimetre styrene rods to cut short lengths and glue them on to make a thin box surround to create window frames. One of the other improvements I needed to make, really just to disguise the model's 3D printed origin, was to apply a very thin styrene sheet over the top sides of both the engine bays and also the roof of the cab. Being slightly curved in shape, these parts were most obviously affected by the 3D printing layer lines, so hopefully these cosmetic additions should disguise this fact. Next I'll deal with the engine grills. Again, I simplified the handling of these print elements by simply replacing a detailed rendition of the grills with just an alcove into which I'd later insert some more refined styrene parts. I made this an alcove because I wanted to try out placing in different materials, either rods to make grills or maybe some mesh material to see if that would work. Finally I started to add some refinements like handles and trims, which I didn't add at the 3D print stage. This hybrid way of working, 3D printing the big shapes while adding smaller details later by hand, should sharpen the quality of the overall detail by avoiding the problems you sometimes get when you push your FDM printer to do very small details. A particular detail that was definitely done better the old school way rather than 3D printing was the handrails. If I tried these using the FDM printer route, I would have had to compromise by simplifying the method and simply adding some surface extrusions or bumps to indicate rails. On the other hand, attaching thin brass rods took the detailing look to another level. All the detailing complete, I could now think about painting the Loco. The The first job in my painting process is to prime the model. Now, because this is a hybrid 3D printed come scratch build, I have started tentatively with a very light coat of Tamiya's fine primer. This is an ultra smooth preparatory coat, but it also helps to highlight any flaws in the model surface that I didn't easily see during the construction phase. Being partially 3D printed, there are, for example, occasional layer lines and other small blemishes. These I repair using modelling putty, which I then sand smooth. Because of this, I normally go one step further and then apply a filler primer spray paint. This slightly thicker coat seeps into the indentations and flaws and helps to hide them. With that done, after another once over to check that I'm satisfied, I can then move on to the paint coat stage. Here I decided to go for an overall coat of Tamiya TS10 French Blue. I felt this was a suitably retro colour that would be appropriate for the 1970s industrial vehicle. And again, being Tamiya aerosol, it's a fine spray and comes out nice and smooth. While I'm going to go for a more minimalist and simple paint scheme, I do want to add a couple of more detailed paint effects. The main one is adding some warning chevrons to the front and rear bumper plates. But holy cow, now I can't do fine brush painting because of my stupid hand. I've resorted to mask spraying, and I evidently don't yet have the knack. The process is to first of all cut out a tape mask and stick it down on the yellow painted plate area. Then I give it a quick squirt of yellow paint. The theory is that this helps seal the masked lines to prevent bleeding. Then, once dry, you spray on the black. After that's dry, you then peel off the masking tape and you should have a nice clean spray job. Nuh-uh. Nope, that didn't work. I have a feeling that this technique works better with finer airbrushing rather than the ham-fisted rattle can approach. I'll improve eventually, but for now I still have to try and clean up these chevrons somehow. As you can see, I had a sudden change in mind regarding the light blue scheme. It began to irk me and I couldn't stand it any longer. So there was a quick respray of Humbrol Midnight Blue. I think this darker scheme is a bit more reflective of the retro theme I had in mind, and it looks a smidgen more industrial, I think. Right, so that out the way, let's get back on course. Next we have some minor detailing and touching up. And of course I ended up cleaning up that very dodgy job I did with the chevrons, and then I got on to painting the railings. Now, as you can see, I've reverted to still images here, as the idea of videoing my dodgy, wobbly handed brush painting filled me up with dread. And as it turns out, I made the right choice, as the process was so painful to do as it would have been to watch. There were numerous bloopers, which I would have had to edit out had I been filming it, and I had to repeatedly go back and correct my sloppy painting. Still, I got it done in the end. Phew. Now, I originally considered doing some weathering to this model, as I wanted my shunter to look as if it was well used. But as this is just my initial practice model, a prototype before I attempt my second 3D printed model, which will be more of my own design this time, I binned the idea of doing any weathering at this stage. So, despite it being a bit plain, I think the scheme is suitable for a generic shunter. So without any further ado, I thought I'd dull down that glossy paint job with a coat of matte lacquer. After a quick spray, the lacquer indeed dulled down the glossiness of that Humbrol blue and left it with a subtle satin finish. So that's that. Well, not exactly that's that. There's a couple of final jobs I have to do before we can call this experiment completed. I want to do some headlamps and also install some windows. Now, for the headlights, my brother did actually say, why don't you install some LEDs, but my electrical abilities are just not up to that, particularly in the small space. So what I thought Rather than do the usual thing I do with model vehicle headlights, which is to paint them, I decided to have a bit of an experiment here and try out using nail gems for the Loco's headlights. This turned out to be yet another job that caused a lot of swearing, and I ended up with a lot of gems stuck to my fingers. But I persevered and I tried to video record this, but in the end I just had so many restarts on this because of wobbly hands and things like this that I ended up doing this particular cut. So, to the final touch, some windows. It's a fairly simple process of sticking some thin pieces of transparent plastic, rescued from some empty food packets, to the inside of the cab. For this I used an old favourite, which I used for attaching scale model plane canopies, Pacer's Formula 560. This dries crystal clear, so there's less worry about getting any splodges of glue onto the window panes themselves. Despite the cab having no interior detail to see, I want to include windscreens as they give a nice bit of reflection when they catch the light. I also think it makes a model appear a little more realistic, and it finishes off this little shunter quite nicely. So there we go, a simple 3D printed and scratch detailed freelance shunter body design. All that's left to do is to attach the body to the KATO 11-109 power chassis, and it's job done. Again here, I should emphasise that this is not my original design. Rather, it's one that's based almost entirely on a design done by Budget Model Railways and their shunter body model. I was a wee bit disappointed not to have been able to do my original rear cabbed shunter idea, but the KATO chassis is such that it almost makes a centre cab design the only one you can do. And as this was just my first experimental attempt at a 3D Loco body, I reluctantly followed along with the Budget Model Railways lead. That said, I got what I wanted out of this project and learned a lot about how to design the model for 3D printing. Of particular importance was learning about the shell thickness and what I can get away with. Sadly, my painting skills are now such that it's a little lacklustre as far as the scheme goes, but having completed this, I'm now ready for my next challenge, and I now know to be a bit more picky about which KATO power chassis to choose in order that I can make a Loco body model of my own design in the future. Well, all it's left to do is to give my new shunter a bit of an outing. I slapped down a loop of track to test the Loco. As you can see, I didn't put much thought into the design of the track layout, but something new is my 5-foot foldable trestle table, which will allow me to quickly set up a temporary practice layout in my attic man cave. Up until now, I've had to haul all my railway pieces all the way downstairs to set up on the dining room table, only then to have to dismantle the track again before the wife got home. Anyway, it's really great to see the little shunter on the track and zipping around smoothly thanks to the excellent KATO power chassis. It feels great to see a model making project to the end, and I'm fairly pleased with the results. It's an okay test build, and the occasional mistakes and faults in the 3D design have provided me with things that I should watch out for when I start my next design. Well, the Loco on the track looks okay, but let's get it hooked up to some new arrivals to my collection. A brace of KATO Temu 300 steel-sided boxcars and a lovely KATO YO 6000 caboose. As usual, I'm finding it hard to get any definite information on the purpose of these freight cars or any other Japanese rolling stock, mainly because most of the information is in Japanese. However, I did a bit of asking around on one of the Facebook groups who deal with Japanese railways, and according to them, these particular boxcars are steel-sided because they're used to transport, or were used to transport, quicklime of all things. Now, I looked into this a bit further, and what quicklime was used for was in the manufacture of steel. So these were taken steel mills, they were used in the mix to make rolled steel, I guess. So these cars would be great if you set up a little steel mill on your layout. As for when they were used by JNR, there's kind of teasing reference on the Train Tracks website of 1968, a bit vague, but I'm going to gamble that these were used over my 1970s target period for my layout. Now, unlike my Temu cars, I found some more definite information on the little caboose wagons. These were guards vans, as we call them in the UK, and were made from 1962 and in use up until 1987, so they cover the period that I'm interested in very nicely. In any case, these look fantastic, particularly because they have little red LED brake lights, I guess, in the back of the caboose. These look wonderful going around the track. Well, and that's it for this episode of Mill Geek and Chew. I hope there's been something of interest for you, and if you really didn't mind, it would be great if you liked and subscribed this video, just to give me a little bit of encouragement to actually get off my ass and make some more. So take care, and I'll see you next time.